Uh, Good day, everyone, and welcome again to New Answers Podcast. As some of you know, and for those of you who don't, we're a community of everyday people sharing solutions to life challenges based on personal experience. I'm Gwendolyn Flynn, and today we're going to turn our attention to an ever present life challenge, as I see it, and that's money. With inflation and talk of tariffs and other circumstances, many of which are beyond our control, we never seem to have enough of it. How does that happen? And money and finances is a subject most of us haven't really been instructed on how to gain it, how to manage it, and from the beginning, like even from our parents, we haven't had that. Uh, or through the schooling that we've been exposed to, unless you're a business or an accounting professional. We generally learn about money and how to manage it on our own through trial and error. And I'm not one who is good with numbers. I've never been. I'm more the humanities type person, the creative kind of person, than I am with money. But in the course of our conversation today, we're going to play catch up on learning how to recognize opportunities to gain money and how to manage it. And we'll cover um, topics like our relationship to money, the misperceptions or conceptions about money, strategies to protect ourselves against losing money, and financial independence. And we're calling this conversation Tapping into Our Abundance. Joining me in this conversation is Umi Santillan. And I consider her a money guru, kind of a money whisperer. So, welcome to New Answers podcast, Umi. How would you describe yourself? I described you as a money guru. Whisper, describe yourself.
Well, I thank you so much for that introduction, Gwen. That was incredible, and I am so honored to be here. I would just say that I help people tap into their abundance. And
Okay.
really, I also want to kind of let people know how much I appreciate them also for being part of this conversation because if you're listening to this conversation, it means that you love Gwen, you know what a powerhouse lady she is and all of the incredible work that she does for the community. And it also means that you're invested in yourself. And, when we think about abundance, I don't always think about that as money. I mean, that's a small part of the equation, but really tapping into your abundance means aligning your lifestyle with your values and your purpose. And part of that is definitely money, but we haven't always been taught, how does money work? And a lot of times we live our lives actually controlled by our finances rather than us being in control of our finances. So, all I do is I help educate and then provide some really simple tools that people can implement and help them tap into their abundance.
Great. That's exactly what we're looking for. And I like that attitude. So so you're not limiting yourself to thinking about money, the dollar bill or whatever. You're kind of broadening that conversation. That's that's a good way to approach it. So how did you get into finance and, being involved in this way that you are?
Right. So, it's funny, Gwen, because you said you're not a numbers girl. I'm not a numbers girl either. My background's in the humanities as well. I studied politics and law. And my background is in organizational management. So I used to help get people into office. I used to also be a director for Environment California. So we were responsible for helping pass legislation in California to protect the environment and public health. So I've always been a people person. And I got into that line of work because I wanted to help the community. And, I was actually living my dream life. I was in my dream career, and I was 22 years old. And I remember getting to a place, when I was a director at Environment California. We were traveling for a conference. And I remember just thinking, like, is this it? Like, I worked so hard to get to this place, and I thought that this work is so meaningful, which it is. Being a community organizer is so valuable. But I started to get a little bit burned out because you could spend decades working on a piece of legislation, right? I'm sure you can relate to this conversation and this area. And, in the matter of a day, a large multinational company could come in and lobby it, and there goes 2 decades of work. And I saw people that I really loved and respected, my role models, getting burned out really quickly, living paycheck to paycheck, burdened by debt, and not really knowing how money works. And I found that to be sort of counterintuitive, because when you're in an organizing or fundraising space, we're raising hundreds of millions of dollars to pass a piece of legislation to help the community or the environment. But if we don't know how money works, how are we going to create any type of change, right? And you can't pour from an empty cup. So I thought, well, how can I create impact and help people, but not at the expense of myself? And so I went down the rabbit hole, and I started learning about uh, financial literacy, really for myself, because I had student loan debt, as I'm sure a lot of people, most people in America do, right? The average graduate is uh, coming out of their college years as a young adult with over $30,000 in debt. And, I didn't want to be in debt for the rest of my life. And so I started to explore different options around that. And I remember being offered a 401k and not knowing really how it worked. And I started asking my colleagues who have 401ks, how does this work? Or a 403b, how does it work? And nobody knew the answer. And even people in the HR department couldn't really tell me how it worked. And so I just continued to do my research. I'm very grateful because I came across the right community of people who actually took the time to educate me and teach me the financial tools and strategies that I have since implemented. And now I get to share that information with others. And I actually ended up quitting my job at this conference. Actually, I was in Baltimore, Maryland. This was in 2019. I left my salaried position. I started my business full time, and I have not looked back since. And I completely pivoted, and now my main social justice issue is to help people heal their relationship with money.
What a story. I had no idea that was your story. But going from sort of cause, but also politics, right? Civic engagement and discourse into this financial arena. How courageous you were to do that. First of all, you had to educate yourself around the relationships that we have with money, and then to take that brave step of leaving. You said you were burning out, but leaving the job that you knew about and going into this new arena. Wow. My hat's off to you.
Oh, thank you, Gwen. Not everyone might see it that way, right? I remember actually as I was transitioning, I had a lot of fears coming up within me because I used to think that wealthy people were maybe bad or greedy. I would always work more on the progressive slate, and some of the campaigns I had ran were actually called money-free campaigns. So I actually had to overcome a lot of my internal conditioning around money, and never in a million years would I have thought that my path would have gone down finance. Actually, it was a lot of I know this is also a spiritual podcast, so it was after a lot of prayer and meditation actually that I received the guidance and the strength to actually make that transition.
Oh my goodness, that's great to know. Because that's one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about. Maybe if it's not on this episode. Maybe it's something we can do in the future. And that's that phrase that keeps coming up to me about money is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
And being able to, you know, examine that and explore that and, maybe even having to overcome that. So, but maybe that's a conversation for another time. For
That's
now,
a whole nother podcast episode.
I think so. So maybe we should bookmark that for a future conversation. So tell me then, what makes I think I have a little inkling about what makes your work different because you kind of alluded to the fact that you're coming at it from having done some meditation and it's kind of related to spirituality for you. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Right. I mean, it kind of goes back to what really is abundance, right? And, for the way that I think about abundance is that abundance is about joy. It's about having loving relationships and having a great quality of life and living in alignment with your purpose. That's really what abundance is about. And for me, when I think about what is money and what's money's role in it, money is just a tool. It's an energy and it's something that allows you to be more of who you are. So if you're not the best person, maybe you're a greedy person and you have a lot of money, you're just going to be even more greedy. But if you're the type of person who is philanthropic, that cares about others, that is giving, and you have more money, what is that going to allow you to do in the world and what sort of impact will you have? So, ultimately, I believe that money just makes you more of who you are. And it's also a tool that can provide a level of freedom, whether that's freedom of time, um, freedom of location, and freedom to choose how you make your decisions in life.
That's very interesting. I love this approach. So what are the misconceptions that we have about money?
Right. I mean, you already alluded to one of them earlier, right? Which is money is the root of all evil. I grew up actually hearing that. And, if you're a person of faith and depending on what sort of background and upbringing you had, that might have been something you were just taught growing up. And yeah, I also had to overcome that challenge. And I think that it's interesting when I really dug into that one specifically, the roots of that belief are thousands of years old. It actually goes back to the Roman Empire, where the elite were collaborating with the church to basically put that idea out there that, well, the poor in society, they don't have the capacity to handle their finances, so we should protect them from that. And put this idea out there that money is evil and you don't want a lot of it because if you have it you might not be able to enter heaven. And so it was basically a tactic used from thousands of years ago to keep uh poor people complacent and actually okay with the idea of being poor. So, if we can go way back to the roots of inequality, but it's really tied back to our ancient history. And it's funny that it still has such a hold on us thousands of years later, right? Now, coming back to the modern age, I think a lot of people might be intimidated by the idea of money. It tends to make them feel overwhelmed if there's someone that maybe doesn't come from wealth or doesn't have wealth. And one of the ideas that comes up a lot is that you need a lot of money to invest. That if you want to start to invest or start to learn about money, that you have to be at a certain place. Like maybe you have to be at a certain income or you can't have any debt or anything or something like that. But that's actually not true. Even if you're able to save 50, $100 a month, at least start doing that, right? Because over time, if you're saving or investing in the right way, that can grow into thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars if you start early and you invest in the right places, right? So that's one. The second
Mhm.
myth that I hear a lot of people uh talking about, especially when it comes to saving for the future or planning for retirement, is either I'm too young to start planning for retirement or I'm too old to start planning for retirement. Which I always ask, like, so what's the perfect age? So is it, you know, exactly the middle of your life? Like, what does that look like? You know, and it's the answer is really just to start now at whatever age you are. You're never too old or too young. Of course, the earlier you start, the better, because then you're allowing compounding interest to actually work for you. You know, and I'll kind of get into what that means and how to have your money actually working for you. I think we're taught to work really hard for our money, but I like to always ask people, well, when is the last time your money actually worked hard for you? And for most people, that's never, right? The last myth that comes up a lot, I mean, there's so many more, but just, you know, in the interest of time, I think the last one I'll talk about is around budgeting. So sometimes people tend to think that budgeting means sacrificing, that you have to sacrifice the things you love and, you know, not live the lifestyle you want to live. And that's simply not true. You know, budgeting is really just about prioritizing in the same way you would prioritize the relationships that matter to you, you prioritize your time. It's the same thing. And I think how you do the little things is how you're going to do the big things. So, budgeting does not mean sacrifice. It's actually allowing you to prioritize your life so that you can have an amazing quality of life now and also in the future.
Now, this makes so much sense to me, the way you break it down, in terms of the misconceptions and how we can overcome those. There's something you said though at the outset of this portion of it. You said that that this idea about money as the root of all evil goes back to ancient times, and yeah, I do believe that. But bringing it up to today, and it was kind of it was political, basically, right?
Right.
And so bringing it up to today, I guess I opened this whole conversation talking about the fact that we don't seem to have enough of it and we're having to deal with things that are going on and swirling around the world, dealing with inflation and this talks of tariffs and all of that. And now I'm beginning to see on my phone, and this speaks to the issue of having the populace sort of accept the fact that there's not enough money. I'm beginning to see on my phone these, I guess it's feeds that talk about 10 frugal ways of living, and for me that's a signal that these are ways in which whoever is in charge is showing you how you can accept your lifestyle. you know Here's how you can live frugally. What? So again, so even though that's what was the sort of the norm back in ancient times, to get the populace to accept the fact that they don't have to have, that they shouldn't have money, those same practices are happening today. I mean, given that as an example. So the deal is we don't have to accept that. And you're going to talk to us more about some advice that we can, that you can share with folks. And that's, I think, the next question about what advice can you give us about so how we can overcome any stress that we might have about money. I mentioned, as I say in the introduction, inflation and tariffs, and these are things that we don't have control over. Plus, there's other things that are going on in our lives. And I don't know, you mentioned school loans, education loans, which we may or may not have control over. And then there are other life circumstances that happen, right? We talked before the recording about people going through divorce, or what other situations there are. So anyway, what advice, I'm going to stop talking now.
No, I love this because this is the why, right? Why this is so important.
To folks who are stressed about money because of these circumstances that they're facing.
Right. So, and thank you for bringing up what you did, Gwen, because it's so important, right? 72% of Americans are going through financial stress. It's actually the #1 stressor in our country right now. And
That's
like you mentioned,
current statistic, right? Yeah.
that's current statistic. And not to mention uh Americans who have significant debt are 4 times more likely to be depressed.
Mhm.
That 76% of Americans with financial challenges have anxiety. So these are directly linked to our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, our relationships. Isn't the #1 cause of divorce financial issues? So when you really peel it back, a lot of what we care about in the social justice and advocacy space, if you really peel it back, a lot of it goes back to money and our relationship with it, right? Um, and so I think part of that is the first one is actually awareness, right? So I have I would say that I tend to be more of a frugal person in the things where I want to be, right? When I'm traveling, all bets are off. I give myself sort of seasons, like, all right, when it's something that matters, like an experience or, spending time with friends and making memories, I don't limit myself, right? But if it's something that, I don't want to spend excessively on buying coffee outside every day because I like the coffee I make at home. I make a really good mushroom latte at home, and if that saves me $10 a day, that adds up. If I take that and I invest it somewhere or, save it in a high yield account or a tax advantage strategy, like that's going to actually create more wealth for me, right? So I will say, I don't think there's anything wrong with being frugal, although people can take it to the excess and it can contribute to sort of the limiting beliefs that we might have around money. So I think you just have to be aware of what your financial habits are. That's actually the first area, even in just, personal development work, right? Is just being aware of what your habits are. So something that people can do if they really want to start to identify some of their beliefs around money, because your beliefs are underpinning, your identity, which underpins your habits, right? So if you really want to start to transform that, I think you have to start there. So you can start to write out what are some of your beliefs around money. Is it money is the root of all evil, or it's really hard to make money, money is scarce, whatever that is, or I'm wealthy, I have a lot of money, money loves me, whatever those beliefs are, to start to write them down and ask yourself, where did these come from? Is it my family? Was it, did I hear this in school? Was it from religious upbringing or just something that I saw in the media? Where does this belief come from? And then if it's a belief that doesn't serve you, then you need to figure out how to get rid of it, whether that's crossing it out, ripping it up, burning it. And then you can always write an affirmation that is the inverse of that belief. So if it's really difficult to make money, you could say it's really easy to make money. So easy to make money, right? And start to reprogram your beliefs around that. And to kind of open up the field, I always like to ask people, at the end of a financial review, especially if there's someone that maybe finance is newer to them, I always like to ask, if money wasn't an issue for you, if money just doesn't exist, right? What's one thing you'd be doing right now that you can't otherwise do? And then that always opens it up. And I hear beautiful answers, like people want to start nonprofits, or they want to build a school, or, they want to adopt kids, or they just want to be traveling, whatever that might be for them. I find that especially in the advocacy space, people have really big dreams and goals. And, I don't want people to feel like money is a limiting factor. So that's just a conversation that I like to have with people, before I get into all the technical stuff. So if you want, I can actually get into some of the more practical education and tools that I like to teach folks around, what are the rules of money, just really basic things to understand that might help them out.
I think this is a perfect time to do that. Yes. Can
Oh,
you share that
great.
with us?
So I'm gonna try to share my screen here. Hopefully you guys can all see this.
I think some of the things that you were just talking about just really kind of struck a chord with me. Um, about being able to write down what your belief systems are now, because we probably just do it, don't think about it. It just, is part of us. But when you are able to write it down and it becomes a little more concrete to you, then you can counter that. And I like what you said about, how to invert whatever those beliefs are and kind of re reset it, I guess, right? With some affirmative uh, expressions. So that makes sense. So those are the things that really stood out for me and just what you just said. So now you're sharing
Good.
the rule. What is this? The rule of 72?
The rule of 72. So we're taking it back to high school math class or econ class, but I promise it's not anything too crazy. It's pretty simple math, right? And by the way, this concept was made famous by Einstein, who's a pretty smart guy. And, he calls the rule of 72, or he did call the rule of 72 the eighth wonder of the world. It's a really powerful concept, not just in your finances, but in life. It's just the idea of compounding returns. Right? Now, when it comes to your money, how does it work? Well, you take the number 72, you divide it by the interest rate. So whatever account your money is in, what they'd be paying you, and it gives you the number of years it takes for your money to double, right? By the way, there's really only two sides of money. There's the paying side and the earning side. Most people are on the paying side. They're paying their credit card interest or their mortgage or their auto loan or student loans, and they're paying all this interest. But guess what? There's some folks who are on the earning side of that, right? The lending companies, the banks, right? So if you understand this concept and you can actually apply just this one concept to your finances, you can move from the paying side to the earning side. And we all would probably rather be on the earning side, right? So most people, Gwen, when they get a paycheck and they want to just save their money somewhere, where do they keep their money?
Probably. Oh, you're asking me that question? I
Yeah, we're gonna make this a little interactive.
So the first place that comes to mind for me is a bank.
Right. That's where most people keep their money. Some people just say, well, it goes to my bills, right? But if you're saving a little bit, it usually goes to the bank. Now, let me ask you, Gwen, what do most banks pay you when you keep your hard-earned money with them? What are they giving you in return?
I don't know. They talk about trying to think of the terminology. I'm telling you, I'm not a finance person. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
I didn't start out that way either.
interest, no. Dividends, no. I don't know what the word is.
Well, usually they don't really give you anything. Right? They usually don't give you much. I mean, most bank accounts, the average return, like Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, US Bank, they're giving you like 0.01 to 0.04%.
Right. That
0.04 is generous actually for a bank, which if you think about it, that's less than a tenth of a percent, right? That's crazy. That's like less than 100th of this number, right? So if you have the most generous bank in the world, let's pretend that's paying you 1% for your money, that means it takes 72 years for your money to double. Because you just take the number 72 and you divide it by the interest rate, right? Now let's pretend that we're all 29 and we had $10,000 and we didn't blow it like most 29-year-olds might, and we actually wanted to save it somewhere. So if you saved it in, let's say, a bank account that's paying you 1%, by the time that 10 turns into $20,000, not taking into account inflation or taxes, you'd be 101 years old for your money to double. Now,
that's
I
great.
don't know about you guys, but I don't know if I want to wait that long.
And
I
who's
don't know if I'll be around.
for heaven's sakes? I mean, our lifespans, are pretty high now, but 101 is rare. Let me ask you this. So would a credit union be any different?
Right, good question. I actually only keep my money in credit unions, and even my credit union checking and savings accounts are 0.01%. But I will say I use CDs, I use high yield savings accounts and money market accounts. So actually my liquid, savings accounts are usually around between 4 and 6%.
Mhm.
So you kind of have to look around to find those. Interest rates do change all the time. I have recommendations if people are curious about, what strategies I use for those, but credit unions tend to be better, but just because it's in a credit union, it doesn't mean they're going to give you, a higher yield. You kind of have to look for one, or, know someone that can refer you to a good account. But keep in mind, right, you guys, that inflation averages, usually around 3% a year. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's 7, 8%, sometimes it's at 2%. But like on average in America, we're gonna say it's around 3%, right? So if your money is actually not making 3%, you're actually losing money, right? Think about eggs, right? If you don't know what inflation is, just think about eggs.
Right.
Right? That's a good way to think about, well, what is inflation? It's basically, the value of the US dollar slowly goes down over time. And you want to make sure that wherever you're saving your money is at least keeping up with inflation, right? So I always suggest to look for somewhere where you can make at least 4%. Now, if you have something like a 403b or an IRA or a 401k or some sort of retirement plan, the average retirement plan in America averages between 4 and 6%, over the duration of someone's working years. It's better than 1%, right? So that means that your money would double between every 12 to 18 years. So you can see in this example, we're all 29. We started out the same age, the same amount of money, but just because of the number or the rate at which it compounds, you have a really different amount at the age of 65. So you'd have between 40 and $80,000. Now, actually, a large percentage of Americans are getting to the age of 65 with around that much in their retirement account. But let me ask you, Gwen, we live in LA, right? Is 40 to $80,000 enough to retire on?
No.
Probably not even for a year, right? You'd probably have to go and find a job. And if you guys have noticed, the retirement age keeps getting pushed later and later, every couple of years. And there's a reason for that, right? So 4 to 6% is okay, right? But it might not be enough uh to really fully retire on. Now, uh there's another example here at the end. If your money is growing at 10%, you take 72 divided by 10, it gives you 7.2. So if your money is growing at 10% every year, that means that your money's now doubling every 7.2 years. So that same $10,000 at the age of 29, at the age of 65 would be worth, I hope you guys can see this number here, right? Can you see this? It's $320,000. And you'll notice that you didn't put a single penny, a single dollar into the strategy from 29. You actually just put it in the right type of account. And so the reason why we teach this rule is because in your accumulation years, it's so important to fight for every interest point, because that's how you make your money work for you, right? So is this so far making sense? Like, where would we want to keep our money? Probably the highest yielding type of account, right? 10, if it's growing at 12%, that means your money's now doubling every 6 years. It's pretty cool. Your money's now working for you, right? People always ask me like, well, where do I find this? Like, does my bank have this? I'm pretty sure. I mean, you can ask your bank, but most banks probably won't be doing 6 to 10%, or 12%, right? Banks might give you like 4 to 5%. So, definitely talk to a professional to see where you can get, the highest returns. Now, This one's important, but the next rule is actually just as important because there's three main strategies for how to grow your money, right? There's fixed, variable, and indexed. So the fixed strategy and the variable strategy, we're pretty familiar with, most of us. Fixed would be like your bank accounts, a CD, a high yield savings account, or if you keep cash under your mattress or you buried it in the backyard, that's a fixed strategy, right? It's not really growing, but it's usually liquid, meaning you can access it, but it's probably not keeping up with inflation, right? But not to say you shouldn't have a fixed strategy, right? You want to be able to access your money when you need it. Now, variable strategy, that's the stock market. So if you have a 403b, a 401k, an IRA, or anything in the stock market, you have a Robinhood account, you have real estate, cryptocurrency, all of that is variable. Now, the dictionary definition of variable is actually unpredictable and unreliable. And it's funny because most Americans keep their retirement money in this strategy. Now, it can be really good because there's some years that your money is going to go up with the market and you can have great returns. But if you guys were around in 2008 or during COVID or even the earlier months of 2025, what happened? We went through recessions, right? In 2008, the average retirement account actually lost between 30 to 40% of its portfolio, of its balance, right? So let's say you did great and you were, 65 that year, you had $1 million in your account. Just because the market took a turn, you lost $400,000. And I can tell stories of so many people who've gone through that, very same experience. And it's really devastating because people are told, oh, just, get your 401k, contribute to it every month and you'll be fine. And it can be a good account to have if you're an investor, right? You're supposed to buy low and sell high. And if you actively monitor your accounts, variable strategies can be great, but they might not want to be where you put all your eggs. I was always taught not to put all your eggs in one basket. And I do think that's a good piece of advice to have. And really there's only two rules of money. This is from Warren Buffett. Rule number one is don't lose your money. And rule number two is don't forget rule number one. So, in a variable strategy, 100% of your money can be lost because it's in the market, right? So it's basically gambling money, legalized gambling money. Now, the third strategy is what's called an index strategy. Now, a lot of people think, oh, well, I have index funds. And, those are great too. Index funds are basically like a basket of different stocks that are held in one portfolio, like the S&P 500, for example. It's the top Fortune 500 companies in the US that's put into one basket. And, that's a lot of times where we invest. But that's still a variable strategy because your financial state is going to go up and down depending on how those companies are performing. Now, an index strategy utilizes something called market mirroring. So you'll notice that you can kind of see the outline of the market here, right? So when the markets go up, your money goes up with it. But when the markets have a downturn or a recession, your money stays the same. You don't really make anything in a down year, but you don't lose anything. And when the market comes up, you get to recover all the gains. So again, I was always told not to put all your eggs in one basket. But I mean, if you're thinking about your long-term money that you want it to be there for you in the future, you want it to be safe, you don't want to lose it. I mean, which of these three strategies makes the most sense?
Yeah, I believe in diversification of resources on a number of different planes. And so indexing to me seems like a way to go because the variable strategy, it's just too unreliable, I would think. It's too, it fluctuates with what's going on in the marketplace. And then, of course, the fixed is just too stagnant. So it seems to me that third strategy is probably the way to go, but you need to talk to somebody about how to set that up.
Right. Of course, you want to definitely work with a professional for all three. You know, I think there's a time and place for all of them. I like variable strategies as well. That being said, I'm still in my 20s, and you know, I always tell people in the variable strategy, well, how much money can you afford to lose?
Mhm.
So if just know that it's okay to put your money there, but 100% of that money can be lost. So if you're someone that likes cryptocurrency, or you like trading, you like day trading and all of that, it's fine. Go for the variable strategy. Just know that you can lose all your money. So in an index strategy, it's not going to be like you buy Bitcoin at $50 a coin and you ride it up to 100,000 or anything crazy like that. It's not like you're going to get lucky. But if you're someone that's a bit more like, you want to be a hands-off investor and just have your money growing for you, but you don't want to be, you know, day trading and all of that, the index strategy, you know, it makes sense for most people, for example, for their retirement strategy, right? But there's a time and place for all three.
Yeah.
Last quick rule of money, everyone's favorite, Uncle Sam and Aunt Iris, right? Our favorite relatives. Anytime you make money in America, you get taxed, right? And we could go into the whole political, that might be a whole episode, right? Is like, you know, where are tax dollars going, right? If you're someone who is an advocate, um, you know, do you want to be someone that's paying a lot in taxes if you know where your money is going? For a lot of us, probably not. That doesn't mean we shouldn't pay taxes, but you know, that's a whole nother conversation. But there's three ways that our money gets taxed in America. One is tax now. So if you get a paycheck, it's usually taxed, right? There's your gross income, and then your net income's usually pretty gross too, because you look at it and you're like, where's half my check? I remember that, my first paycheck, thinking I was going to get a certain amount and looking at it and being like, huh, there's a chunk of it missing. The more you earn, you know, usually the worse that gets. You're like, wait a minute, I'm making more money, but more of it's getting taxed. Pretty crazy, right? And then if you have, let's say, a bank account or a brokerage account, even if you're making 1% on it, and you have any sort of gains in that strategy, you get taxed on it every year. So every time you make money in brokerage accounts or bank accounts, you get taxed annually. So Uncle Sam loves when you keep your money there because you're getting taxed every single year. Now, in a tax deferred strategy, that's a 403b or an IRA, 401k, most retirement accounts in America are taxed later. So tax deferred or tax later just means that you're not paying the taxes going in, but you're paying the taxes coming out. And you know, we're history buffs here, but when we think back to, you know, federal taxes started in 1913 in our country, and right now, I mean, it feels like taxes are high, right? We might feel like taxes are high, but if you know your history, you'll know that we're actually at one of the lowest tax rates historically. So we've had periods where it was up 85 to 92%. So can you imagine, let's say that, you know, you worked really hard all your life and you're finally in retirement, and a lot of people don't realize in retirement they're going to be in the higher or highest tax bracket more so than they were in their income earning years. And can you imagine if taxes go up to like 60, 70, 80%? So let's say you had $1 million in your retirement account and you get taxed on 80% of that, you know, that wouldn't be great because you worked so hard to retire one day. I don't think you'd be able to retire if you had to pay that much in taxes, even at 40%, right? If you're at 40% and then you have a 10% state tax, that's about half. That's half of your money that you worked really hard for. So I always have an analogy I like to use when people have a, you know, a 401k or 403b. It's basically like, let's say, Gwen, that you're a farmer. You got some, uh, you know, you have the land, you have the knowledge, the expertise, and you just need to buy some seeds. So you go down to the local co-op and you know, you go down to purchase your seeds, and the person selling them to you says, okay, well, I'm going to sell you this huge bag of seeds and it's only $100. And you go, okay, great. Well, how much are the taxes? Well, 25%. So it's 25 bucks, but you know, don't worry about it, Gwen. You don't have to pay me the taxes on it now. Just go ahead and take your seeds, go plant your harvest, and I'll just come back for it later. And you walk away thinking like, oh, I got a great deal. You know, I got my bag of seeds for $100 and I saved $25. Great. So you go home, you plant your seeds, and you have a successful harvest. So 6 months later, you're sitting around with your family, having a great time, celebrating. And let's say you had turned a profit and you made $10,000 from your harvest. And the local seed salesman comes back to your house, knocks on your door and says, well, congratulations, Gwen, on your harvest. You made $10,000. So I'm here for my 25%. So at that point, now you owe him $2,500 versus the 25 had you just paid the taxes on the front end. So, the only difference between what's happening there and your 401k or 403b is that at least you know what the taxes are. But we don't know what the taxes will be in the future, with over $36 trillion in debt and, everything going on in the world, taxes could go up. Who knows, right? But it's basically like shaking hands with the government and saying, hey, I trust you and I'm going to pay you my taxes on the harvest, on whatever that you decide to make taxes in the future. So not a great deal, for most people. A lot of times they just didn't understand that's what they were getting into. And I remember having this sort of conversation before I got my 403b and kind of thinking, well, maybe there's another option, right? And that's where tax advantages come in. There's lots of different tax advantages out there. There's Roth IRA, municipal bonds, 529Bs, or even leveraging well-structured life insurance strategies that have a cash value. There's ways to set up different strategies where you can pay taxes now and never again. So you can grow your money and not pay taxes on the accumulation or on the distribution. So, if you have more questions about how those work, definitely consult with a professional because wealthy people use tax advantages. They have been for generations. What about everyone else? Why shouldn't we use tax advantages, right?
We should have that. Yeah, we should have that access to it too, to that kind of information as well. So
Right.
we are going to have to close out our conversation, but you have given us quite a bit of information here. And I know you've got the 6 steps to financial freedom. I think that might be the subject of another conversation that we have. And be able to share that, but you can see on the screen here those 6 steps: cash flow, emergency fund, debt management, proper protection, build wealth, preserve wealth. So we can get into that in more detail in a future conversation. Right now, I think in the time that we have left, maybe in the next 4 minutes or so, I'd like for you to share any final words of encouragement that you might have for folks. And then I also want to call on folks to think about what it is that they heard today that they really connect with, and you want to know more about, because I want to share information on how you can get in touch with Umi to dig more deeply into some of these subject areas. But for now, let's start with Umi, you giving us any final words of encouragement that you might have, and then we'll.
Right. Oh, thank you so much for that, Gwen. And, I really appreciate you opening up this conversation because it is so timely and necessary for all of us. So I just want to encourage anyone that might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed or like, wow, that was a lot of information. What do I do with it, right? Well, there's a pathway to become financially free. And I won't go into all these 6 areas. You can kind of look at this screen and, see what applies for you. But there is a path to becoming financially free. And so I would really encourage you to reach out if you have any questions or you need any support along the journey, because it is possible to become financially free. I've been able to do that in my life, and I am very blessed that I get to help others along that journey. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I think we all deserve it. It's something that, especially if you're someone that cares about other people, you have a big purpose in life and a mission to help others, you deserve to be financially free. And it is actually a lot more simple than you might think. So I'd love to know the audience's thoughts on this topic, what questions come up for them, what fears might come up. If you're excited about something, we'd love to know what your thoughts are. I'm happy to engage with you guys, individually. I offer free consultation calls, so I'll share my information with Gwen. My info might be down on the call notes or the show notes. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram at abundantlyumi. You can send me a DM if you have any questions. And I'll also share my other contact details, like my email. So if you have any questions, you can let me know. And we'd love to see your comments and really hear what you guys think about this topic. Do you want to hear more of it? And what specific areas speak to you guys the most? So thank you so much, Gwen, for having me on, because you're a very bold visionary. Not everyone is going to be brave enough to talk about finances, especially as it relates to political issues and spiritual in the spiritual realm, right? But they're all very much connected. So I just want to commend you for having me on and having this incredible conversation.
Well, I think it's an important conversation to have, especially at this time. And I know one of the areas that I want to pursue in a future conversation is this notion of, you talked about the three strategies that can be used, and you made reference to like 401ks and 403bs. But in our new economy, there are a lot of people, and I guess I should say that I associate those options, the 401ks and 403bs, with folks who are employed by someone. And in our economy today, there's not a lot of companies that may offer those kind of packages, those kind of financial benefits. And so there's a lot of people who are independents, who are, this gig economy. I don't know if they're still calling it that. Like, what do they do to set something like that up? So that's why I think we need to continue this conversation. And we want to talk about the steps to financial freedom as well. But let us know, I'm going to piggyback on what Umi has said. Let us know if you'd like us to continue this conversation, because those are two topics that I want to talk about. Maybe there's three, because we talked about.
There's so many. What you brought up is a great point, and I think being self-employed or a business owner, you have way more opportunities out there. So I love talking about that topic.
So we can talk about that, and that the idea when we open it up about money being the root of all evil. I mean, so there's a lot to talk about. But want to hear from you all who are listening to this. What is it you want to know more about? And I'm going to leave information on how you can get in touch with Umi to go further. But also, if you want to hear from us having these conversations on a regular basis, that would be great. What money subject do you want to learn more about? You can place your request for money topics in the comment section below this video. Subscribe, and you will receive notices when we upload any new episodes about money, about spirituality, and about other topics that we've talked about. So right now, I want to express my gratitude to you, Umi. Thank you for sharing your wealth of experience and expertise and knowledge about money and how we can tap into our abundance. I'm Gwendolyn Flynn, and I will see you next time.